All right, this is day 37 of the challenge. We got 1 Corinthians chapter 6 to chapter 10. Chapter 6, there's, I guess the people in the Corinth church, they were suing each other, and Paul is just kind of like, this is ridiculous because don't you guys know that you're going to judge angels one day, but you guys are taking yourselves and, disagreeing and going to the courts and suing each other. You guys should be able to, is nobody wise? Shouldn't you guys be able to figure this out yourself? And actually, Jesus kind of gives the way to do it. If somebody sinned against you, you go to them, you tell them what's wrong, and then if you guys can't figure it out, you get somebody else in, and then you get, if you guys can't, if with the mediator you can't figure it out, then eventually you get to a place where you just don't associate with the person who's in the wrong. And so I think that's just solve things out. You're between yourselves. Don't go to the court. Don't sue each other. It's ridiculous for Christians to sue each other, not shoe each other. And then he talks about how you were once, how they were once adulterous people, idlers, drunkards, and then, but all those things you have been cleansed of, and so you need to stop acting like that, and be forgiving. And he even goes so far as to say, like, why not be defrauded by somebody else? Like, what's the big deal? Like, this is. All of this stuff in this world is fleeting, and you're making a big deal about it. Strive to do what is, like Jesus says, storing up treasures in heaven. Where your heart is, so is your treasure. Then he talks about all things being lawful, but all things aren't to your benefit. And so this is like, nothing in and of itself is evil. Like, for instance, sexual activity is not sinful in and of itself. It's lawful for you, but it's lawful in the right context, in marriage, right? And so what he's saying is there's the things in and of themselves do not make it clean. It's just how we use it and abuse it that do. And so he's saying that Paul can get married if he wanted to. He can have a drink of wine if he wanted to, because the thing in and of itself is not sinful. But he goes on as you start hearing his language, he's like, but for the sake of other people, even though I have this knowledge of freedom, I'm not going to do it because I don't want nobody to stumble. Which brings it to the next point, is that everything is lawful for him, but he's not going to be mastered by anything or enslaved by anything or be influenced by anything. And so with that, it goes that, again, let's use the drinking and the sexual activity. He's not going to be mastered by those things. Especially like drinking, if he had a drink, he's not going to be a drunkard. He's not going to allow anything to be mastered over him except for Christ. And it's the same thing that should happen with us. This is one of those, I think people have issues, with. It's one of those. This kind of falls into maybe the gray areas, but it's all about love. And if you know that it's going to be a problem if so and so knew you like to drink a beer here and there, then for their sake, you won't do it, so that way they won't stumble and judge you. And it's okay, because you're acting in love, and that the knowledge that you can do it in freedom is what puffs you up, and that's what he's going to go into actually in the next couple chapters. There's another claim to flee from sexual immorality, and that we were not our own, and that we were paid for, like we were bought at a price. And that's just to show that it's not that we can't do anything, it's that you don't want to do anything. You want to do things that please God, please Christ, and fleeing from sexual morality is, it's one of those. He actually goes into about it. I don't know if it was the chapter before, but he talks about, would you unite yourself with a prostitute? Would the church do that? Would it, because they become the two become one flesh. It's in Genesis. And so, that's why the sin always talks about, sexual sin is a sin that you commit against your own body. And so it's on a different realm of sins compared to maybe if I cussed or something, because this is actually, I'm sinning against my own body, my own flesh. Chapter 7, he talks about some principles of marriage. A lot of it it talks about essentially the struggle about being married to an unbeliever, whether or not you should be married, the benefits of being married, and the benefits of being unmarried. And Paul is suggesting that if everybody should just be like him, which he was unmarried, because his efforts aren't divided between pleasing his wife and pleasing God. Because when you do get married, your time is separated. Like instead of maybe giving yourself up to prayer and reading scriptures as much as you maybe wanted to, or fasting or doing other things, you kind of, you get caught up in what sheets match the curtains. It just happens. That's part of the marriage life. And so Paul is saying, like, if you wanted to devote, it's better. It's good to be married, but it's better to be single. And just in terms of your ability to serve God. That's not to say that you can't serve God with being married, because I think that's ridiculous, because the apostles were married, and I think even Peter was married, and so they were serving Christ. But he's just saying that you can do a lot more, or you can devote your own personal self better to not be married. And I think that's a very reasonable thing. I think he's right. That's not to say, again, he's making the distinction very clear. Even Jesus, he said that whoever can hear this, let him hear it. And so it's just one of those things. I think in my own circle of friends, I think marriage is emphasized too much, and people aren't too supportive of being single and actually striving. And I think there's this marriage bug that goes around. And so it's just, again, I think the company that you keep, they're gonna be like that. If we were around people that were like, no, be single and do this and do that, and do stuff for the Lord and all that stuff, then that'd be other mentality. But again, he says that it's okay to be married, and then he talked about a bunch of different things about divorcing, and I think the next one is about widows, and that if a woman is a widow, then it's good for her to remain unmarried, but it's not a sin if she does get married again. That is, of course, if the husband has died. But if they were divorced, then she should only be reconciled back into the husband. And so that's just chapter 7. Chapter 8 talks about food offering to idols. This kind of goes back to chapter 6 to me a little bit. And he's kind of talking about, people's different faiths. Like, some faiths allow people to eat anything, and some people's faiths allow them to eat just vegetables. I guess, I don't know if it's really allegorical, or if it's just, I think that may have actually been some of the practice. Like, they were kind of afraid from eating anything with the blood, or maybe eating some of the unclean foods, whatever. So they're like, you know what, I'm just gonna eat vegetables and just be done with it. I don't want to worry about that. So and they're justified. They're abstaining. Their abstinence, they're doing it to please God, and it's justified. The other person, he's saying on the other side, if I'm giving thanks and I'm doing everything and giving glory to God, then why do you judge me for that? So he's kind of saying, like, let everybody be as they are, except for things in terms of, I guess, morality, like sexual immorality, being drunk, which leads to sexual immorality sometimes, most of the times. Just things like this, stuff like that, I guess. But then he talks about, verse 13, his conclusion was that he'll abstain from meat for the sake of not causing his brothers to stumble. And so that's the love that that he has for the people. And Paul's mindset, I think, is vastly different from the number of Christians, even especially in myself. I don't want to just say everybody, but his mindset is a lot different. Everybody kind of gets hung up on the, well, I'm doing this in faith, so it's okay for me to do it, and I can have a drink, I can have a smoke, or whatever. It's not a big deal to me. I have the faith that, and so I think that self-indulging part of the freedom that God gives us is something that is kind of prevalent. But Paul has a different mentality. His mentality is that, wherever I go, I'm going to do it so that way somebody might be saved. If I need to be upholding the ceremonies of the Jews, then I'll do that. If I need to talk and just eat things that the Gentiles do, I can do that. But he has I think a tremendous amount of faith, because he does things and he's not convicted that he's eating certain foods, and he's not convicted by them, because he does have this understanding, and he's not putting it out there so that way other people can judge him. He's just doing it in faith, and he has the mindset that some of them might be saved. And I think that mindset is what we would need to have in order to really live like he is, and not just say it, like, oh, because of this scripture. Like, no, do you really is your real desire to save somebody? He goes on further to talk about, oh yeah, again, the knowledge that puffs up, but love is what builds up, and I kind of said that in chapter 6. Got ahead of myself. Let's see, 1 Corinthians 9. He talks about, he kind of ends up saying that he's surrendering his rights. And he's saying that he does have the right, and Jesus asserts this too, that a laborer is due his wages, and so for the gospel, you work for the gospel, you have the right to to be paid or to be helped out or for there to be some provision for you. I think where we err is when we take the money or whatever is given to us and we're living fat while and everybody else is struggling. And I think that's definitely not the place Paul is talking about. But he like, again, I think Paul's just he's a special type of Christian because he essentially gave up all of that. He worked, he had a job. He was a full-time minister, but he had a job, and because he said that he didn't want anybody to take away his right to boast that I'm doing it for the money. And I think that we can all learn something. We can learn from that. That we have our own vocation, our own careers, and we're supporting our own selves, so that way we're not a burden to everybody else. And Paul, he's justified in that. Like you can't say that Paul's doing this because all the money that he's making from it. And so therefore that's how people judge, and that's why I think a lot of people see hypocrisy in the church today, because you have these people, these mega churches and these mega pastors living in mansions and having jets and driving Bentleys and stuff, and it's just, you're kind of like, man, this is kind of ridiculous, and so Paul had it right, I think, when he was talking about the humility that comes with it. And he in verse 15 he says he denounces such provisions. And again, he goes into more what I said for the last chapter about taking up the identity of the Jews or the Gentiles or the weak. He's gonna just eat vegetables. So what? If some of them might be saved from it, then he'll do it. Verse 24 to 27 talks about temperance and enduring to finish the race. He uses the analogy of he's not like shadow boxing. He's not just he's running this race in an expectance to win something. And this is why he's walking blamelessly, so he cannot be disqualified, which would be the type of training that an athlete would do. To walk blamelessly is to being a Christian, as practicing and training would be to an athlete. And so he's saying that we need to make every effort to be blameless. Moving on to chapter 10, he talks about warning against idolatry. And in the first 6 verses, he kind of goes over about Moses and the people of Israel and how they followed the cloud through the water, and it was a baptism, that they were with Moses, and then they ate spiritual food, and then they drank water from the spiritual rock that was Christ. But then he goes to say, like, they had all these experiences with God, and some of them still became adulterous. Not idolatrous. They still practiced idolatry. I mix up 2 words. Let's see, and then verse 7, it says that some of them became idolaters. And it has this verse like, they ate, they drank, and then they played. And then they got up and played. And I was like, this is a weird scripture to quote. But apparently what the issue was with that, I think it's verse 7, was that the pagan practices were that they would have these feasts, and then they would dance. And they would have these dances, and then these dances would be, celebrating the pagan gods that they worshipped. And then from there would usually be some kind of lascivious acts or sexual acts that kind of, they just, orgies and stuff like that. And so that's what they were giving themselves into. And I guess apparently this is not from the commentaries I've read, I think dancing and stuff like that is not a common practice in worship for maybe like the traditional Hebrews. Because I've read one commentary and it made mention that this practice was adopted, and it became so much a part of the culture that King David used it. Of course, the one where he says, "Bring out the harps and bring out the things," and the commentary suggested that it has pagan origins, and so that's something to think about. Verses 8 to 11 talks about staying away from the immorality and don't test Christ and don't grumble. So again, he's trying to teach us how to be blamed by not complaining, by not trying to test Christ, maybe test him out and see how far you can get away with something, or if you're really real, God, then do this for me. There's nothing wrong with asking God to help you with your unbelief, But there's a special kind of test to where, I wish I had a better definition for it, but I'm going to move on. Verse 13, you cannot, this is a popular one, you cannot be tempted beyond what you can bear, and then you also be given a way out. So, just abstain, deny yourself, you can bear it. I think in Hebrews it says that nobody's, fought sin to the point of bloodshed, except Christ. He actually died on a cross. But with us, it's like, he's not going to give us anything more than we bear. So whenever we do give up, it's just that we've allowed ourselves to. We've allowed ourselves to be deceived. We've submitted, relinquished our will, so that way we can please our flesh or whatever, our desires, because he's always given us an escape. And moving on. And then then he talks about, he's talking about being upright and whatnot, and he's talking about how he uses the Lord's Supper as a point of reference, the drinking of the wine, drinking from the cup, and the eating of the bread, and that the food, and that you can't be a part of doing idolatrous acts, and be a part of the Lord's Supper, because the idols that they're worshiping to or submitting to are really demons. And he's like, how can this fellowship exist? You need to make a decision. You need to stop what you're doing. And also in verse 24 it says, don't seek your own, but the good of your neighbor. And so that's kind of the idea that, even though you had, again, back to the chapter 8, I think, even though you have this knowledge that you can, why would you want to do that when somebody is suffering in their faith for that? So, for their sake, and if you really want to love somebody, then, abstain from that thing that they think is wrong, and, don't let them know that you have a part of it, and, just, help them out, guide them, love them. 22 to 33 talks about the law of love and how it allows for self-denial. In the and it's love. The law of love allows for self-denial. So if you're really loving somebody, then you'll be willing to deny yourself, so that way they can be edified, be edified. And either way, we ought to do such acts in knowledge of the freedom we possessed and in the love that Christ has towards us. That's just a little note that I wrote, that even though we know we can, some of us know that we can do anything. Everything's lawful for me. We should still, with that knowledge, have the love that Christ has towards us, and use that to reach other people and not allow people to judge us, or so we can walk blamelessly. Because in the end of the day, this, Paul says, this life is passing away, and what good is it really for us if I didn't go out and go to a bar on the weekend, if I ran into somebody who highly esteemed me, so I shouldn't, so I wouldn't do that thing, so that way I can be blameless and they can be edified, and we can live on peacefully, as with all men, as he says. So that wraps up 6 to 10. You guys have an awesome day, and God bless.